Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, we're back at it again with another wonderful build for Elden Ring, and I have one question for you. How would you like to be Zeus himself, with the power of a god, to strike down the gods and demigods of the lands between? Today we are harnessing the raw power of lightning to kick up a storm and shock the world, killing everything in sight. Specifically, today's build focuses around making pure lightning as strong as it physically can be, and taking advantage of a few particularly strong spells to make the world fall before you. Of course, there are tons of silly things you can do with ancient dragon lightning specifically, and we've gone over those on the channel before multiple times, but what about regular lightning? Well, it can get quite silly too in its own right, and it's fun to smite your foes down with the purest form of lightning around. None of that weird red stuff, just straight up yellow lightning from the heavens. With that said, today's build is mostly based around a couple of spells, with a ton of ways to boost them stacked up on top of each other on our character as well. The main one then is Lightning Strike. This incantation takes a second to cast, then you launch off a wave of lightning strikes in front of you in a cone that hit the ground a second later. This has pretty decent range and it extends out to the sides a bit so it can catch things that try to dodge it decently well too. But the real kicker with this spell is once you cast it the first time, any repeated inputs come out, well, like lightning, extremely fast. So you can just spam the button to call down lightning strike after lightning strike after lightning strike and just rain damage on anything that's in front of you. This gets incredibly potent with the right buffs, and speaking of buffs, this actually got one of the buffs in patch 1.07, which decreased its FP consumption on use, making the spam of this ability even more possible than it was before. Of course, on top of this, we have a couple of other incantations used for damage as well, as sometimes Lightning Strike just doesn't quite do the trick on its own, and situational strength is important to consider in this game as well. These are Lightning Spear, the chargeable lightning bolt that you throw with your own hands, and this was actually buffed in patch 1.07 as well, increasing its damage when charged. You mostly use this when you want to attack, but you aren't in lightning strike range. The damage is a bit lower, but the range is way higher. Then we have Honed Bolt, which calls down lightning directly on top of your target. You won't really use this much in PvE except on particularly jumpy enemies, as it is the fastest one of these spells to go off after casting, but in PvP this spell gets absolutely silly, on which note, this build is pretty great in PvP. Honed Bolt is your go-to spell here by far, and the others can be useful as well too for a change of pace, because the only way someone can beat Honed Bolt spam is by perfectly rolling on rhythm until you have to stop casting. The trick to this is you can change incantations while spamming to Lightning Strike or Lightning Spear, and if they are still expecting a Honed Bolt, you can catch them off guard really easily. This build does struggle a little bit with spammier melee weapons, but we have a counter to that too in Dragon Bolt Blessing. If your opponent is using smaller weapons, simply use this incantation and their hits will bounce off of you, making them legitimately incapable of comboing you to death in any way.
I am immortal!
With that then, let's start going over how we achieve this beautiful setup from the ground up. First up, of course, is our spellcasting implement, which in this case is the Gravelstone Seal. This has pretty solid scaling, but more importantly, it gives you a 15% bonus to Dragon Cult incantations, and all of our lightning spells count as such. Ideally, you want to have one in your main hand and one in your offhand as these stack together, but you can't get a second one unless you do New Game Plus or get a friend to drop you one. In order to get this for yourself in Leyndell before the capital turns to ash, go to the West Capital Rampart site of Grace. Head to the balcony on the northwestern side and jump off safely. At the bottom, head further north and you'll see a couple of knights, one of which will drop this seal for you on death. Then as far as your armor goes, it is mostly up to you for a mix of fashion and pure tankiness, but the head is pretty set in stone. Specifically, it's the Imp Head Corpse. This extremely heavy helmet has decent damage negation and looks quite, interesting, but more importantly, it gives you 2 faith just for having it on, which makes your stat spread much cleaner as a result. To get this, go to Leyndell before it turns to ash, specifically the Avenue Balcony site of Grace, go up the stairs beside you, and head east on the main road until you reach the big double doors. Turn right here to see an alleyway and follow it to the end, where you'll find this on a corpse against the wall. Then moving on to your talismans, we of course want to have the 2 that boost incantation damage, which is Flasks Canvas Talisman, which you get from killing Gowry in his shack after finishing Millicent's questline one way or the other. This boosts your incantation damage by 8%, which is obviously incredible for a build focused around incantations. Then we also have the Faithful's Canvas Talisman, which boosts your incantation damage by 4% and stacks with the Flock, and this one comes from the Celia Crystal Tunnel area in Caelid. Third up for talismans, you want the Lightning Scorpion Charm Talisman. This boosts all lightning damage by about 12% at the cost of lowering damage negation a little bit, but the boost is incredibly worth it regardless in PvE. To get this one, head to the Wyndham Catacombs in the Altus Plateau and open the Imp Seal door found inside. Then finally for talismans is the Ritual Sword Talisman. This boosts your your damage by 10% when you're at full health, and given this build is generally built around having some range away from enemies, you can have this active a lot more often than not. To get this, just head to the Lux Runes in the Altus Plateau and defeat the boss down the stairs there. As well, it's extremely useful to have the Dragon Crest Drake Shield on standby. I'd recommend using this instead of the Lightning Scorpion Charm in PvP, and instead of the Ritual Sword Talisman on spammier bosses in PvE that will run at you and hit you before you get any damage in. As well, it's useful to have the Iron Jar Aromatic item too. This is a body buff item that makes you nearly unflinchable to most attacks, only getting staggered by big weapons doing big hits. Generally speaking, you want to use this on any boss where the enemy is using small enough weapons but also hits fast enough that you can't cast spells without it. Then for our wondrous flask, we have two very important inclusions. The first of which is of course the Lightning Shrouding Crack tier, which increases all lightning damage that you do by 20% for its duration, and you can get this by killing the boss at the minor Erdtree in the northeast of the Liurnia region. Then secondarily, we have the Cerulean Hidden tier, which simply makes you consume no FP from any actions for 15 seconds after you drink your flask, letting you spam out a bunch of lightning strikes at the start of the fight that cost nothing but stamina. To get this one, kill the boss at the minor Erdtree located on the path downwards from Volcano Manor. Then we get to move on to our spells, and to start off we have sort of the unsung heroes of the situation. Of course we have Golden Vow, which boosts all damage you deal by 10% and also boosts damage negation by 15%, and this is found in the Corpse Tent Shack on the eastern side of Mount Gelmir. Then we have Howl of Shabiri. You basically want to use this anytime that you aren't using the Iron Jar Aromatic. This increases all damage you deal by 25%, but also increases your damage intake by 30%. It lasts for 40 seconds after casting, and you can find it in the Frenzy Flame Tower in the northeastern side of Liurnia. Then as we mentioned earlier, we also have Dragonbolt Blessing for its ability to make smaller weapons bounce off of you, and this comes from the Stormcolor Church in the Altus Plateau. After that, we move on to our big offensive incantations of the day, and those are Lightning Strike, which comes from a scarab located here, just southeast and down from the minor Erdtree in the Weeping Peninsula. Then for both Lightning Spear and Honed Bolt, you need to find the Dragon Cult Prayer Book and give it to a spell teacher where you can learn it. This book is found by defeating the Lightning Knight found roaming outside of the Artist's Shack on the eastern side of Liurnia. And that's it for your equipment, but what about the stats you want to have while wielding it? Well, first and foremost is Vigor. Anywhere above 40 Vigor is able to avoid being one-shot and end game, but I much prefer a nice, more comfortable 60. Then we want to get to 78 Faith specifically. The helmet we have gives us 2 Faith, which gives us 80 total Faith on top of that to reach the soft cap. Then after that, you want to split everything else between Mind and Endurance, favoring Endurance just slightly as it takes more stamina to cast Lightning Strike than it does FP, but you want to keep them somewhat even in general. And that's it, everyone. The way to make this regular old pure non-dragon lightning incredibly strong in Elden Ring. You can just absolutely dust some of the harder bosses in seconds, and this functions incredibly well in PvP too. Not to mention it's just plain fun to have the power of lightning in your own hands. I hope you've enjoyed this build, and I hope you enjoy using it if you try it out for yourself. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.